is something that we could talk for actually days and even weeks. But our topic for this afternoon is patient safety in surgery. This is something that was added in the textbook of surgery in Schwartz only, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, in the 10th edition. And I am a general surgeon by training for the past more than 30 years, but I've been doing work in patient safety and quality for more than 20 years as well. So this is a personal advocacy of mine. This is something that I've been working on to let people understand. But I do believe that at least now it is a byword in healthcare patient safety here in our country. And maybe with the work of myself and a few other people, I think we could say that at least the consciousness for patient safety is there. So allow me to share my slides. I'll be running quickly through some of them. And let's see. Okay. Can you actually see it? Can you see the slide?
Yes po, Doc.
Okay, so let's do this. Okay, so the objective for this afternoon is, wait a minute, let me just clear some of the things in my screen out of the way. I could be able to. If you do have questions, feel free to post them in the chat so we could run through them maybe quickly at the end of the lecture if we have time. So our objectives is to introduce you to the significance of principles and initiatives in patient safety, to be familiar with the concepts of culture of safety and systems-based practice, to be aware of the factors that contribute to patient harm, strategies to prevent and eliminate errors and harm, we'll be talking about that, to be enlightened on the importance of proper communication between physicians, the medical team, patients with their families, and we talk about teams. These are the other key people in the hospital like nurses, pharmacists, technicians, medtechs, to prepare you as team member and partner in enhancing patient safety together in our continuing journey as healthcare professionals. And you, as medical students, will eventually be part of that team. The focus for medical students is really to understand what is patient safety as a definition, the impact of medical errors and preventable harm, understanding systems and complexity of patient care, human factors, understanding and learning from errors. Sorry for the typo on that. Teamwork and being a team player, engaging patients, and quality improvement methods. It seems like a lot, but I'll be giving you an overview of each one of them. So let's start with the definition of patient safety, and I'll be getting this definition primarily from the World Health Organization, the WHO. It is a framework of organized activities that creates cultures, processes, procedures, behaviors, even technologies and environments in healthcare that consistently, or at least should consistently and sustainably lower risk, reduce the occurrence of avoidable harm, make error less likely, and reduce its impact when it does occur. So I hope you can actually embody now what this definition is as we go further into the lecture. We like to first make you understand that there are what we call known high-risk industries in the world right now. And one of those recognized high-risk industries is the airline industry. And those working in industries like the nuclear reactor is another one of them, because they have been known to be high risk from the very start and have many safeguards in place, monitoring processes in place to understand and try to prevent errors from happening that might result in the loss of life. They do utilize a lot of standardized guidelines, SOPs, as many of them call it, checklists, a proactive reporting structure. and we'll talk about that later on as well, and very detailed debriefing, especially when things go wrong, but even when things go right. And for them, safety is a priority. We actually identify what we call high-risk organizations or high-risk systems. And this can be defined to be those that have a potential to create a catastrophe, which is an event leading to loss of human life, depending on the number on how bad the catastrophe is. It is very complex, large numbers of highly interdependent subsystems with many possible nonlinear or poorly understood combinations. And the processes are very tightly coupled, such that any perturbation or disturbance in the system is transmitted rapidly between the subsystems. I'm quoting Perot here in 1984. So again, part of these definitions is that they have a preoccupation with failure, meaning that they acknowledge that failure could happen anytime and they should be ready for this. A commitment to resilience, capability to detect threats before they cause harm and bounce back when they do occur. Sensitivity to operations or attentiveness to frontline people issues. And they have what they have in place, a culture of safety, wherein the people in this organization have very little or no fear or hesitation that when problems do occur, they will want other people, especially their heads, their supervisors and leaders, to know that they do exist. People are very supportive of one another. They trust one another as best as they could. They have friendly, open relationship, emphasizing credibility and attentiveness. And the work environment is resilient and emphasizes creativity, goal achievement, providing strong feelings of credibility and personal trust. One key, one word, that some would want you to imbibe, whenever you are what we call an HRO, is that you have that mindfulness of things going on around you, that you don't just blindly or automatically do your work without thinking of the consequences of your actions. So you're always mindful of doing the right thing, mindful that, what I'm doing may not be already right, and I have to make sure that I go by the right way. So keep that in mind as we go through the lecture. The airline industry has been known to be such that even though you have hundreds and thousands of flights going on each day all over the world, accidents seldom happen against the number. But unfortunately, they do happen. They collect data on the incidents, on the mortalities or the deaths that happen. And this is data collected by an office in Geneva, the ACRO, or the Aircraft Crashes Record Office. One of the worst in history was in 1977, wherein two 747 collided one another in a runway. One was taking off and one was in the runway, resulting in the loss of 583 lives in a single incident. Another one was in 1985 when a Japan Airlines crashed from the air, killing all 520 passengers on board. The 9/11 incident, though it wasn't an airline crash. The incident involving three airlines that were used by terrorists resulted in the loss of lives both in the plane and in the ground of 2,700. And as you can see, one of the lowest in record is in 2013. But surprisingly, in 2017, there were no jet aircraft mortalities, jet aircraft in particular. So they only had small propeller aircraft incidents here. For the last maybe three years, 2023 was pretty good at 120. But starting the end of 2024, things again didn't start to look good. 318 for the whole year of 2024. But about 300 of this, about 200 of this actually occurred in December of 2024. So far, with the first 2 months of the year, there has been 117 deaths from crashes. Okay? And for the last 3 months, December, January, and February, it could be almost about 300. So it is alarming. You want to average it over 12 years, about 1,200 mortalities a year. So you're scared of this, and considering that the airline industry is one of the safest around. That's why when you ride an airplane, they're very particular about safety procedures. Flight attendants are not really glorified servers. More than anything, they are safety officers, such that when things go wrong in accidents, they are the first to respond, they're the first to guide you on what should be done. Nuclear reactors, the numbers are even much less. 3 in 1961, Chernobyl. I think you've been watching some of those movies in Netflix on this. 56 direct deaths and 4,000 cancer-related deaths. In Fukushima, the latest in 2011, there was only one actually death from that accident. There were some deaths related more to the evacuation and the earthquake that actually occurred. So going now specifically to healthcare, would you consider healthcare as a high-risk organization? And how safe exactly is healthcare? We know that healthcare is intended to preserve, maintain, treat, and manage illness, to try to keep you alive as best as possible, try to provide technologically advanced and excellent medical care, to be cared for only by the best trained medical professionals. What is our safety record? This record hasn't really been very, very clear. We know that sometimes we do have patients that die, no? But it was only in 1999, no, with the landmark publication of the Institute of Medicine, To Err is Human. You could actually download this report if you wish to go into the details of this. This is the first public realization of the true extent of patient harm and safety in a healthcare setting, and deaths occurring from medical errors in 1 year in the United States conservatively place it at 98,000. So compare that to the numbers I was showing you, it is a bit alarming. And this number far outnumbered deaths from motor vehicle accidents, 43, from breast cancer, 42,000, or even HIV, which is a big issue at the time, no, 16,000. And even deaths from workplace injury of 6,000 are outnumbered by deaths that may occur from medication errors alone, which is 7,000. Sorry. So what is the definition of a medical error? It's primarily an unintended act, either by omission or commission. One does not or is not able to achieve its intended outcome. There is a failure of a planned action to be completed as intended. So this is an error of execution. Use of a wrong plan to achieve an aim, an error of planning. Deviation from the process of care, like let's say practice guidelines, could be one example of this, and can occur at an individual or what we call a system level. I'll let you understand the definition of a system level in a short while. So the numbers that I showed you, if you were to translate it again in the airline industry, is something comparable to two jumbo jets, the two crashes involving jumbo jets every 3 days. So that can really a scary number. And the sad thing about this is the numbers are still much less than what it truly is. But again, just to show you what is the key message of this report, not to put anyone that are we really that bad, that it's really a system that's primarily at fault, and it's not about individual competence or maybe incompetence, if you want to put it. There has been inadequate attention to systems design compared to what they're doing in the aviation and nuclear power industry. Our healthcare system is antiquated with respect to safety, relying too much on vigilance, and when things go wrong, rescue and recovery. And this is what I was saying. In 2013, a follow-up study on this, the new evidence on patient harm, compared to the 98,000 that I showed earlier, it's really looking like 400,000 per year, in the United States. But again, this is in the United States alone. The data has been scarce, unfortunately, in the rest of the world. And this is really when the WHO came into the picture. They actually started to have a specific group looking into patient safety. They actually published in 2009 two very, very good publications, the WHO Patient Safety Curriculum for Medical Schools. I wish we could really adopt this in UARM, but this is really a whole curriculum, that does not stop with a single 1 hour lecture. We'll hope to work on this very soon. And the Safe Surgery Saves Life, which I'll be talking about later in this lecture. But it is really this WHO Global Patient Safety Report in 2024, so this is very, very new. This group actually started their work on trying to understand where we are in patient safety in the rest of the world in 2019. They gathered a lot of representatives from different countries. And again, some of the key message in this report is that most data are coming from high-income countries like the United States and very scarce from low to middle-income countries, or maybe not that accurate, or what we call LMIC. And the other concerning content of this report is in the low middle-income countries, 2/3 of patient harm all over the world or globally occur in this group. There is about 134 million adverse events that happen every year, and 2.6 million deaths per year in the rest of the world. So as I told you, the numbers we showed earlier are much, or very, very conservative. So what is the impact of all of this? Right now, medical error ranks as the third leading cause of death in the United States. Okay, about 251,000 deaths occurring. While heart disease, there is 611,000. For cancer, 585,000. Vehicular accidents is only about 34,000 in 1 year. There is unnecessary or excessive medical or surgical care, wherein 21% of medical care administered in the United States may be because of what we call defensive medicine, meaning they just want to do something to protect themselves against one legal suits. Prescription medicine, 22% is a problem, and this is really what brought about the opioid crisis, wherein 249 million opioid prescriptions were done in 2015. Unnecessarily medical tests, about 25%. Unnecessary procedures, about 11%. So, okay, we're saying these numbers are really bad, but why was this allowed to happen? Well, the problem really was not realized until the landmark study in 1999, because we were educated and trained as healthcare workers to be good and error-free, that we were trained that we cannot make a mistake. Unfortunately, we do. In fairness, on an individual basis, errors and mistakes count far and few. So this is really where we bang heads with epidemiologists, because the numbers may not be at any time statistically significant. You can easily attribute harm and deaths as a consequence of the disease that may be inevitable. So when the patient dies, it's because of the disease. But sometimes when you go deep and dig deep down, you'll find out that it was something else. And there is what Lucian Lee, he's a pediatric surgeon who's also done a lot of work in his senior years in patient safety. He calls the tyranny of low numbers. Physicians will have small numbers of errors on a personal level, but when you add it up, this is where the numbers become huge. It's easy to ask a physician if they've been part of an error, and it has not happened to me. Another thing is the definition of what we call near misses. A very good counterpart term for that in the Tagalog vernacular is yung muntik na are not counted. But the fact that something almost happened, an error was just caught in time, does not mean that this could not have progressed to a full-blown error. These are already what we call red flags when we're looking at quality of care. And the data you collect from near misses are very important. That's why up to now, this is really the challenge of people like me who do a lot of work in patient safety, makes it difficult to get everyone on board. This continues to be a challenge, and that's the reason that the whole issue of patient safety becomes a challenge. It's not about bad apples. Many studies have already shown that 5% of medical harm is caused by incompetent or poorly intended care. And 95% of the time, it's really people who's very conscientious, very competent, trying to just do a good job. So, okay, we've identified errors, but why do they really happen? No? So again, these errors tend to be hidden when they do happen because of the prevailing traditional culture of blame, especially if it's not serious enough. Okay, it's easy to hide them. We still are, unfortunately, in a very hierarchical environment rooted to medical education and traditions. That's why when you enter the clinics, you will hear about your senior intern, the senior resident, the senior consultant against the junior resident, the junior consultants. Okay? The tolerance, denial, and complacency in handling problems and error. It's okay, nothing happened to the patient. Let's just let it go. And we are in an industry, no? For a time, it was even a problem among physicians, but now continuing is in the paramedical field, like nurses, medtechs, radtechs, a high manpower turnover industry. People are constantly being hired and they have to be taught and oriented. And sometimes, unfortunately, some of our nurses stay only for 3 years before you have to hire them because they want to go abroad. And right now, and it's good that at least UARM put this as one topic, is that it's not consistently, patient safety is not consistently an educational competency. When errors do happen, it's been known that it happened, it's been identified, it recur because the traditional way, again, of solving the problem is we fix the person, not the flaw in the system. What do you mean by fix a person? Somebody does something very bad, you fire them. But the very person who most probably will not repeat the same mistake, you're taking out of the system. So this is again a very, very major shift now in mindset on how to handle problems. And one is not to fix the person, but fix the system. Another thing that we have to realize is we are in an environment that's very complex. Remember, I mentioned that high-risk organizations are complex organizations. As much as we want that healthcare be given as safe as soon as possible with as little variation as possible, again, the reality is far from that. More so now that we're dealing with more chronic diseases, we're dealing with more complex diseases. It has become so complex in terms of science and technology because of the fast to all the research, no, that's giving us always new evidence and new ways to treat diseases. It's hard sometimes to catch up. Even for me, I'm a general surgeon, but I cannot catch up with the changes happening in the field of cardiology, in nephrology. Even a patient asking me, can you, doc, prescribe me an anti-hypertensive medicine? I think twice before doing so because I don't know what's the latest out there. Many of the medicines I know may already be outdated. We are in a field, in an industry where we have a lot of what we call multi-care, multi-specialty, multi-personnel, multi-procedure, multiple layers of processes, communication, and interaction with the turnover. And even we have to factor in economic issues. Patients can't always afford the best care, okay? There can be financial limitations. And all of this can result in what we call fragmented care, wherein sometimes silos occur, even for one patient, wherein certain specialties may be working in silos and they don't really work as a team. So this is just a picture of how complex care can be. This is a pediatric patient, as you can see, with all those tubes, all those drains connected to the patient. You can see that this is an accident waiting to happen. Okay. But fortunately, this type of patient will survive. Okay, just as long as things go right and go well. But anything wrong can have big consequences. And you can see how many ways things go wrong by just looking in this picture. So errors and harm are not intentional. They're not a failure of cutting-edge medicine, but they result from what we call lapses of sometimes very, very basic safety procedures. Errors occur due to faulty systems, processes that lead people to commit mistakes and fail to prevent them. And the reason this happened is the fact that we are human. Okay? So this is really where the science of human factors now comes in. It acknowledges the universal nature of limitations of being human, the fallibility, the inevitability of error, meaning you assume that error can and may happen anytime. We should really look at how things are designed in the workplace. Is there a chance I can minimize error and its consequences by just changing the way things are designed in the particular workplace, and only recently has been acknowledged as an essential part of patient safety. The thing with being human, or the human factor, is we do cope quite well with complexities. We're good at compensating for some complex and unclear design in terms of equipment and layouts. Maybe I'll ask you one question. You're given a new gadget. Right now, they don't even give you a manual to go with it. You have to download a manual when you don't even have that design open yet. But somehow we figure how to boot up and turn on a device and just try to look for the manual if we end up being unable to do things that we wanted to do. Okay? Because we're pretty good at that, especially the new generation. And the human brain is really very powerful, very flexible, good at finding shortcuts. And I'll talk about and emphasize the problem with that later on. We're good at filtering information. We're good at making sense of things that maybe sometimes does not make sense at all. Okay, look at this. Try to say the color of the word, not the word itself. Okay, let's start. It's a little difficult, no? While it's so easy to just read the word, orange, green, black, blue, red, purple. But once I say blue, red, green, you kind of hesitate, okay? So that's part of the limitations of being human, because it's trying to trick you. Okay, this diagram, when you look at this, okay, the vertical axis seems to be longer, no, than the horizontal one. But put a ruler into it, you can see that they're both 10 centimeters. So again, it's fooling your mind. Another thing, when you look at this, it seems that this is longer compared to the two other ones, no? But if you were to really put something to measure it, they're all the same length, no? But it against tricking your eyes, no, and your mind on what is the real thing. And this thing, this diagram, what do you see? Do you see two faces? Do you see the vase? Again, depending on the perspective you're looking at, it can actually see two different things. I don't know if the video will play. Let me try. If not, I will not play it anymore. We do have some videos in place, but sometimes with Zoom, it doesn't seem to consistently work. Let's give it a try lang. So as you can see, did you guys see that video clearly? Were you able to see it? I'm not sure how
Yes.
videos.
Yes.
Okay naman. Okay naman. Okay. So good. So the fact that we can misperceive situations despite the best intentions is one of the main reasons that our decisions and actions can be flawed, such that we sometimes make really silly mistakes. Okay. This is not because of your experience, your intelligence, motivation. It's just really that humans by nature are prone to error. So like that one, your focus was on something else because you were given an instruction. But if you were to look back, it's easy for you to actually miss something that's just right there staring at you. Situations that can also be increased, that can increase the risk of error, unfamiliarity. So again, if you're getting new in the wards, that's a problem in experience, especially if you're new as you enter clerkship later. Shortage of time, inadequate checking, poor human equipment interface, especially, okay, if there is lack of supervision, limited memory capacity. No, we only have so many terabytes of memory in our head, and you're expected to learn so many things. And I think you experience that every time you have an exam. And once you're with the patient, you're expected to go back to 3 years of what you read. Okay? And again, you don't factor in new knowledge that has come in. Reduced by fatigue, stress, hunger, illness. What we cannot tolerate is hazardous attitude. Okay? One important thing is there is a lack of awareness. This is where mindfulness will come in. And again, something that we're very fond of is multitasking. Fatigue alone. Again, we are in a workplace, especially later on, wherein you might end up working more than 24 hours. Okay? And 24 hours of sleep deprivation could actually result in a blood is similar to a blood alcohol level of 0.1%. In the United States, the legal limit to drive is less than 0.08%. Okay? Other things that can lead to error, complexity, meaning too many steps in a process, too many people involved, workload, sometimes it's too heavy or even too light can affect performance, poor design, interruptions, distractions, and multitasking. This is the most frequent cause. And even in the aviation industry, 50% of the time, this has led to errors. Extremely common in healthcare, especially in the emergency room, where there are about 10 interruptions per hour. And again, I'm talking about culture here, where the authority structure impedes communication and no assignment of responsibility. We cannot change the human condition, but we can change sometimes the condition under which humans work. And this is human factor engineering. And I'll give you some of the examples for this. This is an old toilet, in Narita Airport in Japan. So when I entered it, I actually got scared of using it. As you can see, it is such a complex environment. You don't even know what you're going to do. There's a toilet bowl here, and you have a urinal here. But this bar kind of makes it difficult for you to use this. Is this really a urinal? Then I don't understand why there's like a shower head in this sink over here. Anyway, this is really a very, very complicated design, and they've gotten rid of this particular toilet in that airport. When you have a door, it would be good for you to really know whether should I pull the door or should I push it. So like this door, it doesn't have what we call a grab bar, like you see here on the right picture. So there's no choice but you to push it in, to know that's the right way of doing this. And that's the same way with this. This is a rated fire door. It's red, so you know this is an emergency fire escape. And you can see it has this push bar, giving you no choice that in an emergency, the only way to get through it is pushing this bar to open this door for the fire exit. Another common design thing that prevents you from committing an accident, and this was especially in the year before gadgets became auto voltage, because certain countries have certain voltages. So imagine if you have a 110 volt design and you plug it in the Philippines where the voltage is 220, that's going to basically explode. So they did this by changing the way plugs work. You have the flat ones, the round ones. This is the British one, which is three-pronged, the round. This is another round type. But unfortunately, I guess because of the advent of auto voltage, many hotels now, no, or even in the planes, put this type, no, where you can plug basically any type of plug. But you have to be sure that your device can handle any voltage before you use this. The QWERTY keyboard, okay, this is something that we still continuously use in our keyboards, in our phone. But do you actually know why the design of the letters are this way? The QWERTY, QWERTY, ano kaya QWERTY keyboard. They tried to change it, but unfortunately, people just got used to it. They stuck to it. But the reason this has been such has been outgrown already. The only reason they designed it as such is to prevent this from happening from the old typewriter. This was the design that limit the chance that all the keys will get jammed up depending on the frequency that you use it. So this has been found to lessen the chance that this will happen, no? That they will actually get all tangled up. So it has outgrown its purpose, but we continue to use it. Here's another exercise for you guys. Read the label. And the rest can be a total mess, and you can still read it without a problem. And this is because the human mind does not read every letter by itself, but the word as a whole. It wasn't very difficult, no? Parang it's so easy for you to read it, even though the letters are so jumbled up. And this is really what sometimes can cause what we call error traps, no, in healthcare. So this is very particular in medication, where you have what we call look-alike pharmaceuticals, sometimes the use of equipment. Okay, so you can see that sometimes you have a medication like your cephalosporins. No, look at this. This has ceftazidime and this is cefepime. The first and last letters is M. You can easily make them for mistake. That's why now they design labels to have what they call the Tolman lettering to emphasize the difference between the two. And sometimes they add other alerts like stickers to prevent this from happening. This is another thing with ophthalmic drops. No, they're all packaged the same way. And if you don't read carefully, these three drops actually do three different things. Another new thing is your infusion pumps. You have to very sure that you plug in the right value to make sure that you'll be giving the right dose. So how do we solve the problem? First is understanding, and when errors happen, classifying the errors. There are what we call adverse events, no, injury caused by medical management rather than the underlying condition, which may be preventable, but in a few times they are unpreventable. Negligence is a care that falls below the recognized or acceptable standard of care. There are your near miss, I mentioned earlier, close call or good catch are other terms that did not result in patient harm and did not reach a patient, but sometimes you already had safeguards in place or a person who's pretty sharp who caught it as something that should not be done. And the thing that you don't want to happen, and remember this term, are sentinel events. These are unexpected occurrence or death. Another word we use for this, it's unexpected death or serious physical injury in a patient, no? A patient dying who's not supposed to die, and this will require really an immediate investigation. Sometimes we also have to do what we call a root cause analysis. We'll talk about that in a while. So again, what's important is for you to classify them as part of your reporting systems. And you do have a mechanism that depending on the type of errors or harm that happen, there will come what we call a reporting system or structure. The minor ones, it just goes into a paper report, the data is collected. But the more severe ones has to be elevated to leadership immediately for you to actually mitigate the effect, try to act on it as best as possible, but still would require a deep down investigation to dig deep into why this happened. The major events like your Sentinel events, you really want to make sure that this will not happen again. And the only way you'll know is doing a full root cause analysis. The reaction to errors when this happened in the old way, the way to do it was a person approach. You ask again, who did it? Okay. So there is already the disciplinary action. There is already the blaming and shaming as part of this reaction. But what you want to go, and we'll be talking about this in the culture of safety, is have a systems approach. Okay. Why did it happen? Okay. So you want to understand the error. You want to understand the system on what in the system contributed to this happening or what did not prevent it from happening. So the system is reviewed such that if an error occurs, its damaging effects will be minimized, if not prevented altogether. So you really have this detecting the incident, notifying proper people if needed, reporting it, investigate. You collect data, okay? And you do have what we call assessments. And if needed, feed it back. Whatever you learn, what you also have in a systems approach, as well as a cultures of safety, is aside from trying to understand why the error happened, you want to learn from this error. So you want to have a learning environment as well. Okay? So that's why you do all of this, but it's important for you to collect data, even with the near misses. As I told you, near misses can be red flags already of a flaw in the system. It's just an accident waiting to happen. So some of the things, as I told you, you can use is a root cause analysis. Another word that we use for this is a retroactive investigation, meaning something already happened, you investigate. But another word we use for root cause analysis is the 5 whys. Okay, so let's say something went wrong, a medication error happened. Okay, why? Oh, this nurse gave the wrong drug. Why? Oh, because apparently what was read in the order was different from what was given. Why? So you keep on asking. At the minimum, you have what we call 5 whys. And you'll be surprised sometimes, on what is the root cause of this. When you see red flags, like from near misses, you have data that seems to point that, okay, we seem to be having problems of this, though a harm has not yet happened. You do a more proactive approach to this. So you have what we call a failure modes effects analysis. So this is where you try to work together to identify all potential things that may contribute, meaning you try to see how many ways can this go wrong. So this is doing what we call a proactive risk assessment, or FMEA, or failure modes effect analysis. Once you have something in place to try to change things for the better, there are several frameworks you can do. One of them is a PDCA, a plan, do, check, and act, where you put in place a new process. Okay, you do it, you constantly monitor it through checking, and it seems that it doesn't seem to work, act on it, and you may need to change the plan again. So it's a constant cycle of doing this improvement cycle. You also want to understand that whenever you're understanding a systems-based approach, we apply what we call the Donabinian Quality Framework of SPO, or structure, process, and outcome. Structure is not only the physical structure, it's not also only the facilities in itself, but it may involve equipment, it may involve policies, procedures, clinical practice guidelines or work processes, anything that should guide your people or the structure to do the right process, the second step. So the process now in the workflows, the actual process that results from all of this by your policies, your guidelines, your CPGs, but you will constantly measure it because you want to see if it is working or not. Okay? So you have to measure the outcomes. What happens in the patient as an example. And you have to also constantly look at the culture as well. So when you do systems changes, no, whenever errors happen, you're able to change things that are flawed in the systems. Errors are attributed more, no, to many errors are attributable to characteristic of human cognition, and the risk is predictable. The system can be designed to help prevent the errors or to make them easy to detect or intercepted and provide a means for you to mitigate, no, before it becomes very dangerous. Meaning you try to develop proper safeguards. You put in place tactics to reduce these errors, mitigate their adverse effect, reducing complexities and all of these things. And as I told you, you could do the PDCA and all of this. This is one example of understanding safeguards now. This is actually from James Reason, who's been working on error management, no, where you have the adverse events, but you have in place safeguards, no, or slices, as we call it, that should block it from reaching the patient. This could be first your structure, like your policies, your training, standardization, automation, or improvement. I will illustrate it to you in the next few slides. This is another example, putting in teamwork failures, or sometimes from the personal perspective. Okay? So this is about a medication error that happened, wherein a patient who's already been operated was inadvertently identified by the anesthesiologist as a patient that's about to start surgery. And the patient was given pre-medication. Do tapos na yung medication niya. So you want to look at the policy, okay, the standards, the physical setup, and patient assessment. And what you want is that, okay, let's say the policy did not work. It went through a hole. This is like a Swiss cheese. The physical setups did not work and it fell through. But somehow during the assessment phase, you were able to block it. Okay? So you were able to prevent a patient. When you assess a patient, oh, this is not my right patient. Okay? But unfortunately, okay, things can go wrong. So again, you have the hazard. The policy failed. The location failed because they mixed the patient in both the pre and post-op area. Assessment wasn't done properly and it failed. The informed consent was not reviewed to see that it was ready, and you did not explain to the patient about a second procedure. It failed. And finally, the last line of defense could have been a checklist. That when you did the checklist, you could have prevented that medication from reaching the patient. But unfortunately, all the holes lined up, resulting in harm. So this is what we call the Swiss cheese model. So the challenge right now for healthcare is that it's really so intricate, multifaceted, and complicated. It's really a combination of so many things, okay, that in the end deals with survival of the patient. There's really no industry that can compare in terms of skills needed for a successful outcome. The knowledge base required, as I told you earlier, exceed the capacity of the human brain. But patient safety initiatives begin and end with a system overhaul on putting in place a culture of safety, a mindset of safety for everyone. Okay. The greatest impediment to error prevention is that we punish people for making a mistake when sometimes it's really the system that is at fault. And if you don't change the system, people, another group of people will commit the same mistake. So in a culture of safety, this really should be a leadership and type level priority that should permeate in the whole organization. You acknowledge that you are high risk, error prone, and a non-punitive environment where individuals are able to voluntarily report errors and even near misses without fear of punishment or retaliation. That's the only way to know that things are going wrong. And once you are able to identify this, solve it via a systems approach versus individual corrective measures. Because the solutions are more effective, more permanent, more preventive, more long-lasting. It's really an intimate and passionate desire to make it safer and better. And again, educate people, learn from the mistake. You have to share what you learn from this to other people. And with regards to the people who are involved in it, there's a way of assessing behaviors. If it's really a human error, then you can console them. If it's an at-risk behavior, then you can manage this through coaching. This is a little bit of a higher level. It's really reckless behavior or dangerous attitudes, no, that you should sanction. This is the only thing that you will punish if it is really very reckless. I'd like to briefly talk to you about what we call patient safety goals. This is a list from the WHO about really the major things that causes patient safety issues. But I'd like to focus more on what the Joint Commission International identified as international patient safety goals, of which there are 6. I'll focus on 5. First is patient identification. That at any time that you're going to deal with a patient, you should be using what we call 2 identifiers, none of them being the location of the patient. So this will mean that you need the full name of the patient, and usually the second identifier is the birth date of the patient, which a patient readily knows. Okay, you don't want to identify a patient based, oh, this is for patient in room 101. Oh, this patient in cubicle number 5 in the ER. Okay, because patients change locations. And you could also do this not only in terms of treatment, medication procedure, even when you are actually interpreting lab results to a patient. That before you interpret it, make sure that what is in the chart is the right result for that patient. Okay. Next is proper communication. Well, this picture just shows you some of the pictures I thought of some signs that sometimes does not really make any sense. Horn broke, watch for finger, do not feed. All employees must watch genitals. For restroom, go back towards your behind. It's important to have effective communication because communication can be written, it can be verbal, it can be electronic, okay? And it's also important that you communicate properly, not only through with the team, but even with your patients. Sometimes when you have to transmit what we call verbal or telephone order, you want the recipient to be able to read it back, to know that they understood what you just told them. For the patient, as you try to explain what is happening, what they're supposed to do, a good way to do it is trying to do teach backs. You want to standardize abbreviations, best that you don't accept it, but sometimes you do. But you only have a list of what is acceptable because abbreviations can cause a lot of problems. And in this day of age of electronic communication, you want to avoid what we call cut and paste. Even Texas has created new set of problems. Why is communication very important? Remember about Sentinel events? Root cause in 70% of Sentinel events is communication failure. So it has implication across many processes, no, including even assessments, integration of care, patient and family education, okay? Always try to partner and engage with the patient, talk. And one important skill that you have as a physician is listen very well to the patient and even to your coworkers. Teamwork and communication is very important between doctor to nurses, with trainees, with residents, with medical students. Okay? You should always try to collaborate with them. They're part of the team, especially if you're dealing with different specialties, if you want to make them work in an integrated manner. Sometimes when dealing with patients, you have to overcome cultural and traditional barriers to communication and teamwork as well. Another safety goal is wrong site, wrong procedure, wrong patient surgery. 11% of sentinel events are because of this. What is right, what is left, okay? Offhand, again, it takes you a while to try to find out what is right and left so you can see why things can go wrong with this. Certain specialties are more prone to this, orthopedic surgery being one of them because they deal a lot with extremities. As well, dental is another area because you have so many teeth to work with. Some of the risk factors is inadequate assessment, inadequate review of the records. Sometimes a team member has actually realized this is a wrong team, but because again, they're scared to speak up. Because of the prevailing culture of hierarchy, they let it go. culture that does not support open communication, illegible handwriting, even abbreviations. Other things in emergencies, a surgeon doing multiple procedure, surgeon is pressured to complete it in a short time or for some other reason, patient positions. There are what we call surgical never events. Surgery performed on the wrong part of the body, surgery performed on the wrong patient, wrong surgical procedure performed on a patient, unintended retention of a foreign object. This may be gauzes, it may be instruments, or death in a class 1, ASA class 1 patient, meaning the lowest risk of classification, they die, either during the surgery or immediately after. But these are things that can be considered what we call sentinel events as well. So one way that they've been able to solve this is through the use of checklists. If you have the time, try to get this book by Dr. Atul Gawande, The Checklist Manifesto. And actually, it makes use of the checklist in several instances in healthcare because it's ideal in complexities, it balances ignorance and ineptitude, ensures consistency. And it's done already in many industries, especially the airline industry. This is a typical checklist for a jet airline that pilots use as an example. And currently, we use it as part of what we call the universal protocol, a surgical checklist, or some fondly call it a time clock. There are several components, into this, including marking the site, involvement of the surgeon in getting the consent, oral verification, identifying the patient, the site side as well, and opportunities for you to do a briefing and debriefing. So this is 3 parts: the sign-in before the patient is inducted into anesthesia, before cutting the skin or starting the surgery, and sign-out is before the patient leaves the operating room. So there are several things that are checked that should be completed before these steps are started. The checklist was found to reduce the rate of post-operative complication and death by more than 1/3. So again, depending on the parts that are given, there's even a part that if the patient requires antibiotic prophylaxis, that it's given at the proper time, the timing. And there's an opportunity for the team members to introduce themselves by name and role. And this basically also breaks down hierarchy. At the end of the procedure, sponge counts, instrument count, specimens are identified and labeled properly. So currently, hospitals do most of the right thing on most patients most of the time, but the checklist helps us do all the right things on all patients all the time. Another area of concern as a safety goal is medication error. It can occur in any phase by anyone in the team, from the prescriber, which is the doctor, the pharmacist receiving the order, the medication where it is brought in the wards, the nurse who will administer, and finally the patient. So there are many safety programs. One is identifying what we call high alert medications, which bear a high risk of causing significant harm when used improperly. The sound-alike, look-alike drugs, there are what we call the banned list, and even physicians' illegible handwriting. So again, you can see by looking at this picture that this is again an accident waiting to happen. So they've been able to correct this by putting in computerized system ordering for medication, but again, not many hospitals have this in place. There are some what we call dangerous abbreviations. I don't know if this was taught to you in pharmacology. You should always have a leading zero if you're dealing with the decimal point. And if it's a whole number, you're not supposed to put a trailing zero. You avoid using the mu sign and write the whole word microgram. That's what you want to do to order. And you avoid the things that often ENT use because not many people really understand what it is. ASADAU or OSODOU. Just put right ear, left eye, both eyes. One last thing is hand washing. Again, this is something that at least because of the pandemic, we're a little bit more conscious, but this continues to be a challenge that it's done properly. Be familiar with what we call the 5 moments of hand hygiene. Before patient contact, before aseptic task, after bloody fluid exposure, after patient contacts, and after contact with patient surroundings. Important that you do hand hygiene in these areas, and this is something that's been better because of the pandemic. You want to understand that amongst all of this, you want to do some form of a risk management because you really want to identify those that may actually be prone to errors from happening. Okay? So complications, unfortunately, may not be really avoidable. But what is important for you is for you to understand. In your book in Schwartz, they list several, I won't go into the details, several complications of certain procedures that may happen. The important thing is that you're aware that this may happen, that this is also explained to the patient. When they do happen, it's important for you to recognize early and manage it. Sometimes the complication may happen during the surgery itself. Avoid and minimize through proper assessment, knowledge training, and preparation. Sometimes you don't realize that the patient is actually on blood thinners. And then you did not stop it on time, resulting in bleeding. So these are the things that can be avoided through proper preventive things like proper assessment and knowledge as well. Know your limitations, especially at the start. Do not be afraid to ask for help, especially as you go through. When you start, you're the least experienced of all. Never be afraid to ask for help. Again, one way that you can minimize some of the misunderstanding when it happened is the informed consent. This is not something that should just be signed blindly by the patient, but this is something that should always be explained properly. It's meant to inform, explain, and educate. Okay? And whenever errors do happen, there is a way that you should disclose it as well. That you should be able to maintain the trust of your patients. A brief mention on shortcuts. It works in many ways. Workarounds, bypass substitution, cutting corners, especially if you did it before. It worked. But unfortunately, by bypassing procedures that's meant for safety, you can actually create more problems by doing so. So sometimes you just do it because you're saving time, trying to do more things in the given time that you have. But one thing that you should not, the reason you should do it is that you're just lazy. I told you about cutting and pasting. As we go more electronic, try not to be tempted by cutting and pasting because you could carry forward into your other documents, other things that may not be applicable to the patient, like laterality. Okay, I'd like to end with a few slides. This is really the Institute of Medicine dimensions of healthcare, that you should provide care that is safe, patient-centered, effective, efficient, timely, and equitable. You want to be in an ideal place, that there is no needless death, needless pain or suffering, no helplessness, no another draining, no waste, and no one left out. But in the end, really, what is important in the patient safety program is proper training and competency, communication, a situational awareness or mindfulness of what is happening, be aware of the dangers, the good things that can be done, break down and work above the hierarchy, encourage reporting of incidents, investigate, learn, improve the system, and team work. Okay. So in conclusion, patient quality and patient safety is no rocket science. It's a global problem, but we can work on it a bite at a time. No shortcuts. Value the basics. Constantly learn from our mistakes through a systems approach. Make the system difficult to do something wrong, but easier to make it right. Safe practices. Make it a way of life. Make it a habit that you do the right thing always. And emphasizing the bottom line, safe, effective, timely care in an environment of learning and improvement where the needs of the patient comes first. To err is human, to cover up is unforgivable, to fail to learn is inexcusable. This is something that I like, that I use again in the Tagalog language. The two words having a different emphasis is actually meaning two things. When things go wrong, turuan natin, mga tao, huwag magturuan or don't point fingers. Let's not assume, things are safe, let's assure it all the way. Always have that empathy with patient. Put yourself in their shoes, and that will make you think twice about doing shortcuts or the wrong thing. I'm not someone's spare time, but I'm their undivided attention. If you have a chance to download this film, The Doctor, it's really a good way of humanizing yourself as a doctor. Doc William Hurt here is actually a surgeon who got throat cancer. He was really one of those cocky, mayabang surgeons, but actually when he became a patient himself, he actually humanized him. And it's a very nice read for all, watch for all doctors. I think that's my last slide. So thank you very much. I think I went a little bit over time. Any quick questions? I went about 5 minutes over, 6 minutes over. Any questions? Again, I hope that you can be able to imbibe this, no, as you go forward in your medical profession. I do hope that we could again reconfigure your curriculum, that maybe right before your clinics, I can again share some of the concept of patient safety with you. Again, as a reminder, no, because you're still in your second year and you still have about 1 full year, no, before you enter the clinics. And hopefully you will not forget some of the messages I shared with you today. Okay, any questions? Unfortunately, I was just given, I think, 1 hour for this. Okay, so there being none, I'd like to thank all of you for your time. So thank you very much for your kind attention, and I hope to meet some of you as you move forward, no, through your medical school, in third year especially. Okay, thank you very much.